Okay, lads and gals. So we have this lesson recorded, and it will be uploaded over the YouTube, I believe, and I will use it maybe for the next lessons, maybe next years when I have similar situation like we did during the COVID when you're in the quarantine. So we actually ended up with these terms about 19th century, and last things were about colonialism. I told you that you need to know the major European countries, including also United States and Japan, and what were their major colonies in so-called the third world of especially Africa and Asia. Uh, the status quo, the situation that was here since the early modern period, and how you see how the European empires were growing till especially before the First World War, when all Africa and major Asia were occupied, were parts of these European countries, were the colonies of, and some countries that were unified and created later, like Germany and Italy in the 19th century, as you soon realize, they wanted to change because, as you see, let's say France had all these part of Africa, Britain, all these part of Africa, many countries in Asia too. So if they wanted to change the status quo and make similar empires as Britain or France had, so these countries wanted to seize new colonies or overtake the other seized colonies. So for that reason, their policy, I mean international policy, was so-called imperialistic. It means that you want to build a country that is far beyond the borders of your nation, of your language, of the continent, for example. And to change it, you need to build strong armies. Of course, not only with artillery and all the technological innovations that came with industrial revolution, but also with the navy, later on airplanes. And this is actually building up armies, but also kind of military consciousness among the people that you, as a boy, are taught at school, taught in a family, in society, that you are going to go to the service, to serve in the military. You're going to fight for your country. You're proud of your country, and this nationalism within, or the belief that you need to defend your country, whether or whatever the policy it leads. So this is called militarism. So kind of building the military thinking that you are not afraid of war. And the true fact is that not only Germany or Italy were happy to start a war, but even British or French men entering and enlisting to the army were actually happy to fight back. And we'll explain soon that how it came to be to this First World War poster of Austria, Austro-Hungarian and German soldier banishing Russians, French, the English, Japanese from their lands, from their territories. Yeah, among the interesting links I'm adding is also this Sherlock Holmes movie, the second part with Robert Downey Jr., which I recommend you because actually the later part is actually somehow connected with this kind of militarism, especially in Germany in this like late 19th century stuff. Of course, it's like adventure story, fictional, so not a real one, but it can give you a clue that many people had been preparing for the war before it actually started. Generally, the last part I want to show you is this kind of a mind map, pojmová mysľová mapa of the 19th century that try to explain why we call it the long century and how we connected these revolutions, the period that you had in your assignments, leading to the First World War. The point is that, and major milestones in here says that French Revolution was actually defeated in 1815 with the Battle of Waterloo and all the advantages that French citizens seized, despite of course, authoritarian regime of Napoleon, but concerning civil rights, they were happy and they were glad for kind of a progress they did. In France and many other countries that were controlled by the Holy Alliance, they were conservative monarchies that promised to protect each other from Republican attempts, enlightening attempts, some progressive liberal attempts that may change these monarchies into republics, into something more democratic. Of course, they were creating many forms, many means, like from military interventions to propaganda. For example, Russian intelligence service agencies were preparing various hoaxes, books with fake histories that were in order to create nationalistic identity with Russia, with Slavic people, for example. The same in Britain. They are faking archaeological excavation, for example, to prove that their nation is the best. In Germany, the same thing. Hungarians believing that Magyarization is bringing all other nations of Austro-Hungarian Empire for like better civilization status or class. This actually failed in some countries, and it came with the first wave of revolutions of 1830, that is so-called July Revolution. Every time it starts in France, and France moved from monarchy, from conservative monarchy to constitutional monarchy. That was more open-minded for people, and also internationally, it was much better, much more peaceful, I would say, or maybe helpful, open-minded to liberal attempts, giving more rights to people. In Greece, or for example, Belgium, these two countries seized independence. For example, Poland in a part of Russia. So this rebellion was unsuccessful. They were defeated, and the regime was unstrengthened. In Russia, there was uprising of Decembrists, officers and military commanders who wanted to have constitutional monarchy in Russia with maybe partitional elections, but it failed, and Russia remained conservative monarchy again. Slovakia is another where you will see cholera uprising that actually made this regime of Clemens Metternich in Austria and thus in Slovakia even very strict, and only for some people it was opened. The second wave of revolutions was in 1848, which is called the Spring of Nations. In almost all European states, there were rebellions, revolutions for nationalism in terms of unification of nations. In Italy and Germany, for example, in order of deliberation, let's say Hungarians, Slovaks, Croatians, Romanians, in terms of constitutional political changes to more democratic, more liberal government. That was for Austria, for example. That was for France, for Britain, the Chartist movement, again in Russia. Some of them failed, and let's say Germany, Italy, and Austro-Hungarian Empire had these reforms that were oppressed. And that's why nationalism was and strengthened all conservative regimes. That's why Germany and Italy started to their unification in military way. In Austria-Hungary, despite of slow steps forward, still there was a regime of Alexander Bach, Minister of Foreign Affairs, in which all the nationalities were oppressed, but even people had no any political rights. And it changed later in the 60s, in 1867, in Austro-Magyar agreement, in which Hungarians were provided equal to Austrians, divided empire into equal parts. But in Hungarian part, they started with Magyarization and really strict oppression of non-Magyar nations and ethnic groups, most of them. So this nationalism actually moved these countries to the First World War as countries in this conservative, how to say, camp or branch. And in this way, many people who fell in different way were changing. And during the war, like Italy changed sides, or Austro-Hungarian armies were not so uh, great forces to fight because let's say Czech and Slovak and Serbo-Croatian soldiers were changing the sides like Czechoslovak legions. What about other countries that their revolutions were more successful? Let's say in France, they proclaimed republic and soon after empire, which was very liberal, and later on republic. All of these, France was like cultural capital of the world at the time, with very open-minded population, policy that was really free, and French people really enjoyed the system of democracy, and that's why coming to the war, they came as very liberal country. Britain gradually was giving more and more rights, and there was so-called Chartist movement, and especially since 1840s and 50s, more and more people were given voting rights according to the money, the annual income they had. And gradually to the until the end of the 19th century, it was pretty enough that in the United Kingdom, everybody who had residence, so you had a household, and you are citizen and you are above the age, let's say 25, I'm not sure what is the year, so you have voting right. So this was very successful reform, giving again liberal rights. It means freedom, free rights, or chance to decide for everybody. Russians had very short but dramatic and very important changes during Tsar Alexander II, who in 1862 abolished serfdom, čiže zrušenie poddanstva. It was pretty late compared to the others, but it really started up Russian economy and even culture in Russia. And the results were actually present in Russia even few decades later when Nicholas II, another more conservative Tsar, started to rule in Russia, and he started to oppress other ethnic and religious groups. But in economy, Russia was very liberal. On the other hand, many Russians, because of this wild liberalism, capitalism, felt, how to say, discontent. Many of them lived in poverty. Of course, many Russians became millionaires, like today, but there was a very big gap, scissors between the rich and the poor, and that led to a couple of revolutions, rebellions since 1905. And we will learn about all of this stuff. And when these countries come to First World War, that would be, I would call it, more liberal front and more conservative front. If there were any hidden troubles, so the countries changed the sides or actually quit the war like Russia, or fell apart like Austro-Hungarian Empire. So this is actually something that is my own analysis of the 19th century we are going to speak about. Of course, you may say we may discuss, if not here during the lesson when we meet in person. So if you agree with this interpretation of historical development, if the milestones that I mentioned in here, and of course, if not, you can try to create your own diagram and you will be given bonus mark 1. So you can think of it, and if you find some other solution, you can bring it in here. Let's start from the first countries, just to remind you the beginning, the contents, sorry for that. We are going to move to the British Empire, then France, Italy, Germany, Russia, and the Balkan countries like Serbia, Bulgaria, but even Bosnia and Herzegovina, Albania, and countries that we haven't mentioned yet, or they were actually created. So let's move after all this basic terms and this mind map to the first country, which is United Kingdom. So when we last time, for the last time, we talked about the British Empire, the United Kingdom. It was this famous revolution and creation of constitutional monarchy that was pretty democratic. Then we talked also about the Napoleonic Wars, in which United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland played a major role and became even stronger, especially in the naval. So they became an excellent supreme naval power. Of course, I could pick up any of the thousands of ships, types of the ships that British Empire was using at those times, and United Kingdom at that time was really superpower. What else was there that allowed great economical development for the British Empire? Firstly, it was this liberal policy. You may find it like, okay, so you are free, so what? When you are free, you are motivated to do whatever you want, to fulfill your dreams. So you can start up the business. And if you have open market, democratic like policy, and open market, free zone, like we learned about Adam Smith, libertarian economy, it actually motivates somebody's persuasion to find a fortune, to make a fortune from the business, from a trade. And this is actually giving you a lot of opportunities. And of course, those who got some capital, got some money, who can invest, they are growing. In this way, in inlands, in United Kingdom, the major part of like economy was sheep growing and the wool production from sheep. For the sheep herds, for the flocks of sheep, you need large fields. And this was interesting stuff because hand in hand with taking over more and more lands for the sheep growing, apart from farming, of course, the English nobility that was major like the owners of these fields concerned on Scotland and Ireland. Here they concerned on buying land from poor farmers and peasants who were not so successful. So it compare it like to the very successful supranational company coming to your region and buying small shops, corner shops, also farmers' lands because they provided them a lot of money. But then these farmers had only money, they wasted it and got nothing. On the other hand, these companies, let's say English companies, took over large parts of the territories in Scotland and Ireland, and majorly for sheep growing, they deforested them. So that's why Scotland is beautiful in Ireland, but as you see, there are actually lack of woods, and mostly there are just like pastures for sheep. So this country, I would say, ecologically got devastated, And the other thing is that Scottish population, just like Irish population, lost their farming possibilities, and it was hand in hand kind of assimilation by the English culture and language. And of course, those who were poor, so many of them lost the means of living, so they moved to big cities. And again, they need to learn English, or they moved to America. A lot of Irish. For example, in Ireland, there was big famine potato. One third of Irish died of hunger. The other third emigrated to USA, and one third remained there. And those who stayed, they actually had to find their way of coping on with the English investors. So usually you had to be kind of a collaborant, cooperate with the English. Despite it, they hated them. Their ancestors had been fighting them for centuries. This time, the Irish and Scottish people had to adjust to this British identity, speaking English. And that's why, since that time, especially 19th century, English were successful in assimilating Scottish and Irish Gaelic-speaking population. Of course, there was urbanization going on. As you can see, there were some things changing from, let's say, horse-pulled carriages and crowded streets of, let's say, 1820s, 1830s to these things. And locomotive by Lou Stevenson, moved by steam engine. What was the main thing? The Industrial Revolution, among the things we mentioned, actually escalated and moved on the progress of the countries with the supplies of coal, which in United Kingdom are especially Northern England and Southern Scotland. And when you travel from Manchester to Liverpool to Birmingham, from Glasgow, it's actually like big urban areas that you have no idea move from Manchester to Liverpool, because there are big like steelworks companies and a lot of coal mines, and there are of course neighborhoods with their detached houses, semi-detached houses or terraced houses full of built for workers. And this was built actually on these supplies of coal. Of course, new inventions are coming, and again, you need education, you need like open economy, open culture, state liberal, that people with free minds can concern on inventing things. So that's why it's not a surprise that the United Kingdom was a cradle of many inventors, just like the steam engine of James Watt or flying shuttle by John Kay. These things started the Industrial Revolution in England. And actually, one thing that I have to tell you, because when the Brits started with coal mining, they had a big problems with the landslides in the mines, and they soon realized that they don't have experts for mining, for these deep mining with shafts and mines. For that reason, Queen Victoria, starting the rule in 1840s, decided to invest in the education for these experts, and she was paying royal internship for 100 students from the British Isles to go to study to Austrian Empire, to the city called Chemnitz, yes, Banska Štiavnica, with mining academy in our town. And for like in 1940s or 30s to 40s and 50s, there were actually few hundred British students studying Banska Štiavnica, geodetics, geometry, mining, technical sciences, physics. So they could come back to Birmingham, to Manchester, and build those mines and organize mining, so it was not falling down. There were no landslides. So of course, maybe like a bit like funny, but that's part for us, like contribution to industrial revolution. And Britain became the most industrialized country in the world. So these carriages were not pulled by horses, but anymore, but by locomotives of Louis Stevenson. Actually, this is like 1840s horse railway, but later on there will be this locomotive. In the policy, there was still the things that we were learning about. There were two major political parties, conservatives, the Tories, and liberals, the Whigs, and that's why there were actually not big changes. And even their leaders of these political parties were just switching the seat of the Prime Minister of United Kingdom, which was like Benjamin Disraeli or William Gladstone. And also at this cartoon, there are depicted as the guys preparing to fight for a box match. and there are many books talking about this. But one of the thing is coming with the social changes in here. And I did mention the Chartist movement, Chartistické hnutie, that since 1820 start to strike and promote and demonstrate for more liberal form of voting law for more people. That not only people with very high income had right to vote, but even people lower income, or maybe there would be age census. It means that if you're over the proper age, you can go to elections, so you can be elected. Despite of gradual changes, it became successful, and more people started to vote. Poorer people have different problems and different needs than conservatives or liberals, people like rich landowners and nobility, or liberals like rich merchants and craftsmen. So that's why new political wave appeared. This was the social democracy, and they established first political party on the left part of this political compass, which was Labour Party. They were actually created from the representatives of the trade unions or labor unions, po slovensky nazývame odbory, odborové hnutia, to boli odboroví predáci. For them, of course, it was much more efficient to go and negotiate within the parliament, with the government itself, than to go on a strike and be in a critical conflict mood and like should risk the health of the people. If we are still surprised and you concerned that left is automatically bad, read Charles Dickens' novel Oliver Twist, because uh, imagine that you had to pay for school, you had to pay for the doctor, you had no access to warm water, you live in a one small apartment like with 10 family members. The problems are really different, and social democracy and kind of this like social justice affairs and topics is underestimated even today. At the time, the same thing, but millions of people needed and wanted to change the system. And you see that actually our system today is much more social than it was in the 19th century and this tragic fate of Oliver Twist. Anyway, the British concern at that time, even this day, as one of the best, like golden age of British Empire. Maybe that the first would be with Elizabeth I. The second is this Victorian England or Victorian era, and probably the second will be, in my opinion, this period ending up with Elizabeth II, Elizabethan age. This was actually Victorian period, which is 19th century when she started to rule in 1837. You can watch also the TV series with this actress. I forgot her name. Really pretty lady from Doctor Who series. She was the symbol of strict rule and something like what Elizabeth I had, Elizabeth II, like the mother queen, mother of all the country, still strict anyway. And when her husband died, she was wearing all black, like just like Maria Theresa, our queen and empress, and never get married again, of course, logically. And she was like a great mother of all this empire and symbol of stability. As you can see, she was, by Elizabeth II, she was the longest ruling monarch in history. So women in English or British royal history were really successful. Let's have a look at foreign policy. And as I told you, there was this British colonial empire, and definitely it was the largest, it was the largest in the world. Some colonies even remained bounded to the United Kingdom even to during the 20th century. So yeah, they may have lost, let's say, India that got independent, divided into Pakistan, Bangladesh, Burma, and India. But many of them, like Australia or Canada, some African countries, islands in Caribbean, they call it the West Indies or East Indies, and Pacific Ocean, remain in this the Commonwealth. So remember the Union from the times of Oliver Cromwell that replaced kingdom, but in this way, Commonwealth still is kind of like union or community of English-speaking nations and countries bounded to the Queen of Britain, in this case of Queen Victoria. So that's why in this postcard there is kind of like the motherland, like personification of goddess Athena with British shield, but with various aboriginal population from various lands. If you hear some music, that's Mr. Schmidt's cell phone with yeah, it's Creedence Clearwater Revival Band. But also you see some soldiers of colonial troops, tigers from India, and all that. So this is depicting and celebrating the power of them. So colonies, you need to remember, from many, many countries around, definitely India. At the time, part of India was also Pakistan and Burma and Bangladesh. You need to know also Malaysia, Malaysian islands, definitely Australia and New Zealand are very important, just like Canada in here. In from Africa, I picked up the biggest, the most populated countries, just like Egypt, Sudan, South African Union, and also Nigeria. Of course, there are many others like Zimbabwe, Kenya, and many, many others. And they actually created something you've seen with successful roads stepping over Africa with two boots and holding telegraph wire. Of course, British armies had to fight fiercely to keep this empire, like this famous painting, like British forces fighting against army of the Zulus, with famous chieftain Shaka Zulu fighting for the independence in the middle of South Africa and Botswana. Actually, Zulus were a major tribe, conquering even local Bantu languages, so they were like bloodlusting. But of course, British defeated them. The same thing, and the same country was war against another colonies that had been there before British and after Portuguese, and they were Dutch-speaking Boers. Boers in Dutch means the settler, the farmer, osadnik. And these people lived here for 2 or 3 centuries and created their own specific language called Afrikaan, which is combination of Dutch, English, and Bantu and Zulu languages. These guys actually retreated to the inlands of South Africa, but British were following them, and supported by Germany with excellent weapons, they took on guerrilla warfare, partisan warfare, for which British could not defeat only when they started with the first concentration camps for civilians of Boer origin, and when civilians could not support Boer partisans, so they surrendered and became part of the British Empire. Young Adolf Hitler was watching this, reading Winston Churchill, who was defending creation of concentration camps for these camps for these colonists in here, and he find it as a good idea to use to exterminate the population he didn't like. So you see that sometimes there are actually different things. Now let's compare these two cartoons. One cartoon depicts kind of octopus with a typical cylinder head for England, personification of England, how the octopus hands are stretching all around to various countries all around the world. So if I ask you, if I to ask in the test, so of course, is it positive or is it negative? What does it mean? What the author of this cartoon, is it positive or negative about? What about this one? Obviously, it's a propagation poster, propaganda poster, promoting the British Commonwealth of Nations together. When you look at the uniforms of the soldiers, those who are interested to know, you can read Canada. I can tell these are Australian forces, South Canadian or Indian forces. I can tell you in the both world wars, these people these people were actually fighting alongside with British Empire and helped them to survive. So for many countries were giving also many advantages or independence, like India. British Empire really tried to get the best of it, the most of the empire, but also provide, especially these white colonists, with some freedoms. For example, Ghana was given independence already in 1961 as the first country in Africa from British Commonwealth. But on the other hand, even their leader, Nwanke Nkrumah, he remained not loyal, but actually friendly to British Empire, despite having also chance to turn to socialism, but they didn't. So it's really important how you deal, how you manage your company, your people, your village, the place you stay, and if people are okay and respect you. So this is something to give, and command and manage, control, not only like exploit the resources they have. And this is generally the big map. Those who are interested, including also 18th century colonies that will be USA later on, and also colonies that they seized before the First World War. Despite we have only 7 minutes, but I'll at least start with France in the 19th century, because when I look at we have tomorrow's lesson for Wednesday, we don't have it tomorrow. I believe we will meet at the lesson, but I try to pass as much from France as it gets because we still have these 6-7 minutes to go. France in 19th century was actually also interesting in development. And for this one, I picked up a couple of quotes by Clemens Metternich. Clemens Metternich was a prime minister and chancellor of Austrian Empire. He had a lot of power in Austria because during his functional period, the Emperor Ferdinand V was not very capable of ruling, of his, how to say, lower IQ, lower intelligence. Despite he was very good in personality, he could not rule the country itself. So Clemens Metternich was actually real power behind the throne. He held the real power. And that's why he made a lot of comments on international relationships. And when then he was asked about France in the 19th century, he quoted this interesting sentence: "When Paris has a cold, all Europe sneezes. Keď je Paríž prechladnutá, celá Európa kýcha." Paris is like culture and political center. Everybody looks at this. People like you are learning, studying English. They were learning, people in 19th century learning French, because if you need to read books, need to get new discoveries, new knowledge, you read the best and newest political information and news, you need to go to France and get there. Why? Because France, with the French Revolution, was so influential. With Napoleon, the same thing. We know that after the defeat of Napoleon, the Bourbons restored monarchy twice. One was, of course, soon to be destroyed by Napoleon again, but after the Battle of Waterloo, monarchy was restored. And King Louis XVIII, who was brother of Louis XVI, beheaded king, started to rule in here. You see that this is from the Madame Tussauds Museum in Paris, the wax figurine of him. Really a big guy. He like eating a lot, and that's why he suffered with the I'm not sure you like to say it in English, and that's why he was using these walking sticks to help him. At the time, the monarchy was absolutistic officially. But anyway, they kept some of this Napoleonic version that some things were given to the people to approved in a suffrage, in referendum. But it was very limited to only like 4% of population, which was at the time also in Britain, or for all the century in Russia. Anyway, many of administrative reforms remain in practice. I'm talking about general organizing the state, managing the offices, about bank system, for example, but even, and this is very important, about marriages, for example. And this is very important thing, and you can see it even today when there is debate in Slovak parliament concerning abortions. And you see that sometimes it is too personal a thing that people really don't like about this. And when they realize that during Napoleonic era, they can have even civic divorce. So it is a chance for many women who were bullied, who were harassed in the relationship, in the marriage, they can get divorced and they can get their lives into much better place and road. France at the time was the member of Holy Alliance, so according to this Holy Alliance agreement, they had to intervene against many liberal or deliberation movements, and that's why they intervened in Spain again in 1820s, which was not very popular among French either. In Greece too, and especially among the French population, who of course knew the stories of Achilles, read Plato and Aristotle, they loved culture of ancient Greeks. So it was absolutely unpopular, this intervention in Greeks, who with very just, fair struggle for independence, fighting the Ottomans. So they were alone. So then the next king, Charles X, the youngest brother of Louis XVI, came to the throne. He was even more conservative, and actually he strengthened the strict regime in France, what made people angry. So this conservative regime was that his aim was to restore the absolutistic monarchy in a full scale, and also to restore the power of Catholic Church, which you can imagine that with France in times of Huguenots, and the Edict of Nantes, and kind of tolerant religious education, despite protecting the Pope, but actually forcing the Pope to accept investiture from the Napoleon himself, for example, was kind of really dramatic way. It was the thing that, for example, the freedom of speech and liberty of the press were restricted. And this is something that, for example, in Hungary it is different. But if in Slovakia, the government would try to strict, I don't know, even Zemavek, this is conspirational media, but even SME, Pravda, Denník, Nový Čas, I don't know, whatever. So probably many people would be angry. And that's why also the mother of Jan Kuciak was so dramatic that people saw that this is liberty of press, liberty of freedom, and free of information is limited and restricted. So this was kind of a big shift from like absolutistic monarchy like in Austria to regime that would be very and too conservative. Even the act of sacrilege in churches was punished by the death. So it means that in the church, if somebody did something against the church, so he should have been executed. So that made people very angry in 1830s that start up they went out to the street and started fighting barricades with the first so-called the July Revolution of Paris of 1830. From Wikipedia, I uploaded this short part that would be for the end of the lesson that I quoted. Despite the return of the House of Bourbon to power, France was much changed from the era of Ancien Regime. The egalitarianism, rovnostarstvo, the liberalism of the revolutionaries remained an important force, and the autocracia, samovlada, and the hierarchy of earlier era could not be fully restored. The economic changes, which had been underway long before the revolution, had been further enhanced during the years of turmoil and were firmly entrenched in 1815. These changes had seen the power shift from noble landowners to urban merchants. France is changing. So next lesson, we move on July Revolution in Paris in 1830s and then another revolution of 1840s. So that's the end from the lesson. I'm quitting my recording, so bye bye. No,